The Icklary homeworld was in ruins. Cities lay in smoldering rubble, the ground scorched and cratered from the devastating bombardment. Toxic fumes choked the air, blotting out the twin suns. Icklary bodies lay strewn across the devastated landscape, a testament to the brutal invasion that had brought their once thriving civilization to its knees. Amidst the carnage, a small group huddled in the remains of a collapsed building, terrified and alone. They were the youngest survivors, orphan children who had somehow managed to evade the clutches of the invading Vargsheesh forces. Trembling with fear, they clung to one another, their large, expressive eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of help. For days, they had subsisted on meager scraps, hiding from the Varkesh patrols that roamed the ruined streets. Their parents, their caretakers, their entire world, all had been taken from them in the blink of an eye. The once vibrant Icklary culture, with its rich traditions and deep reverence for family, had been reduced to this, a handful of terrified children, lost and desperate, with no one left to turn to. And then, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon, a lone figure clad in a tattered spacesuit, slowly making its way through the devastation. The children watched with bated breath as the figure drew nearer, unsure whether to trust this unexpected visitor. As the figure drew closer, the children could see that it was a human, a member of the same species that had once forged an uneasy alliance with the Icklary. The human's face was weathered and weary, but its eyes held a spark of determination. The human approached the children cautiously, holding out a hand in a gesture of peace. "It's all right," the human said, its voice tinged with a heavy accent. "I'm here to help." The children stared at the human, their hearts racing. Could this stranger truly be trusted? After all, the Varkesh had come from the stars, just like the humans. What if this was some kind of trap? But the human's manner was gentle, and there was a genuine concern in its eyes that the children could not ignore. Slowly, they began to inch towards the human, sensing that this might be their only chance at survival. The human knelt down, its gaze sweeping across the group of huddled children. "Where are your parents?" it asked, its voice soft and soothing. The children exchanged fearful glances, and one by one, they shook their heads, their tears finally breaking free. The human's expression darkened with sorrow, and it reached out to gently touch the shoulder of the nearest child. "I'm so sorry," it murmured, "but I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." With those words, the human stood and began to survey their surroundings, its brow furrowed in concentration. The children watched, their hearts filled with a fragile hope. "All right," the human said after a moment, turning back to the children. "We need to find shelter, and quickly. The Varkesh will be back soon, and we can't afford to be out in the open." The children nodded, their trust in the human growing with each passing moment. They followed as the human led them through the rubble-strewn streets, navigating the treacherous landscape with a practiced ease. Finally, the human paused before a partially collapsed building, its structural integrity still intact. "This should do," the human said, gesturing for the children to follow. Once inside, the human quickly set about securing the entrance, barricading the doorway and windows with whatever debris they could find. The children watched in awe, their small hands nervously clutching at the tattered remnants of their clothing. "There," the human said, stepping back to survey their makeshift sanctuary. "That should keep the Varkesh out for now. Now, let's see what we can do about getting you all something to eat." The human began to rummage through the rubble, searching for any salvageable supplies. The children huddled together, their eyes wide with wonder and trepidation. This human, this stranger from the stars, had not abandoned them, a stark contrast to the Varkesh invaders who had ruthlessly decimated their world. As the human emerged with a small cachet of rations, the children cautiously approached. their hunger overriding their fear. The human carefully distributed the food, ensuring that each child received a fair share. "Eat up," the human said, its voice warm and encouraging. "You'll need your strength." The children ate in silence, their eyes occasionally darting to the human, as if to ensure that this was not all some cruel dream. The human sat nearby, keeping a vigilant watch, its gaze scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. Once the meager meal was finished, the human turned to the children, its expression grave. "I'm sorry, but I have to be honest with you," the human said. "The situation is dire. Your homeworld has been all but destroyed, and the Varkesh are still out there, hunting for survivors." The children's eyes widened with terror, and they instinctively huddled closer together. "But," the human continued, "I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you safe and to help you find a new home." The children stared at the human, their hearts filled with a fragile hope. "What's your plan?" one of the older children, a young Iklari named Mara, asked, her voice trembling. The human paused, a thoughtful expression crossing its face. "Well, first and foremost, we need to get out of this city. The Varkesh will be searching for survivors, and we can't afford to be trapped here." Mara nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Then what?" "Then," the human said, "we'll need to find a way off this planet. There may be other Iklari survivors out there, and we'll need to find them. Together, we can figure out our next steps." The children exchanged uncertain glances, but the human's unwavering gaze steadied their resolve. "All right," Mara said, her voice growing stronger. "We're with you." The human nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of its lips. "Then, let's get started. We've got a lot of ground to cover and not much time." With that, the human stood and began to gather their meager supplies, the children following closely behind. They had faced the darkest of times, and now, against all odds, they had found a glimmer of hope in the form of this unexpected human ally. As they made their way through the ruined streets, the children couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. The Varkesh were still out there, and the future was uncertain. But with the human by their side, they knew that they had a chance to survive, to rebuild, and to one day reclaim their shattered world. The journey ahead would be arduous, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but in that moment, the children felt a newfound resolve, a determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For they were no longer alone. They had the human, a beacon of hope in the darkness, and they were determined to fight for their survival, no matter the cost. As they pressed on, the children couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would they find other Iklari survivors? Would they be able to forge a new home, a new life, in the aftermath of this devastation? And what of the human, this mysterious stranger who had chosen to stand with them when all others had turned away? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. The children were no longer mere orphans, adrift in a hostile universe. They had a protector, a guardian who had chosen to shoulder their burden and fight for their future. And with the human by their side, they knew that they had a fighting chance. The road ahead would be long and treacherous, but the children were determined to face it head on, their hope kindled by the unwavering compassion of their unexpected ally. Together, they would forge a new path, a path that would one day lead them back to the reclamation of their homeworld and the restoration of their shattered civilization. And as they walked, the children couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude towards the human, whose selfless act of kindness had given them a reason to keep going, to never give up in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. For in the darkest of times, when all others had turned their backs, this human had chosen to stand with them, to fight for their survival and their future. It was a bond forged in the crucible of adversity, a testament to the power of compassion and the resilience of the human spirit. And as the children followed the human through the ruins, they knew that they were no longer alone. They had found a family, a home, in the most unexpected of places. The journey would be long and arduous, but with the human by their side, the children knew that they had a chance to rebuild, to reclaim their world, and to one day stand tall, their spirits unbroken, their hope eternal. As they navigated the treacherous, debris-strewn streets, the children clung to the human, their small hands gripping the tattered fabric of its spacesuit. The human moved with a steady, purposeful gait, its eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. "Where are we going?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human paused, considering the question. "Honestly, I'm not sure," it replied, "but we need to put as much distance between us and the city as possible. The Varkesh will be searching for survivors, and we can't afford to be cornered." Mara nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "Do you think there are other Ikleri out there? Maybe we can find them and figure out what to do next." The human's expression darkened. "I don't know," it admitted. "The Varkesh assault was devastating. But we have to try, for your sake and for the sake of your people." The children exchanged anxious glances, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. They knew that the human was right. Their very survival depended on finding a way off this doomed world. As they pressed on, the landscape around them became increasingly desolate. The once vibrant cities had been reduced to smoldering ruins, the air thick with the stench of death and decay. The children shuddered, their footsteps faltering as they were confronted with the stark reality of their situation. Sensing their distress, the human reached out and gently squeezed Mara's shoulder. "I know this is hard," it said, its voice soft and reassuring. "But we can't give up. We have to keep moving, no matter what." Mara nodded, her expression resolute. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steadier than it had been. The human offered a small smile, then turned and continued leading the way, the children following close behind. As they traversed the ruined landscape, the human kept a constant vigil, its senses alert for any sign of movement or danger. The children, too, were on high alert, their large eyes scanning the horizon for any trace of the Varkesh invaders. Suddenly, a distant rumbling caught their attention, and the human immediately ushered the children into the nearest shelter, a partially collapsed building that offered some semblance of concealment. "Stay quiet," the human whispered, its voice barely audible. "I'm going to take a look." The children huddled together, their hearts pounding as the human cautiously peered out from their makeshift hiding place. Moments later, the human returned, its expression grim. "Varkesh patrols," the human murmured. "They're scouring the area, searching for survivors." Mara's eyes widened with fear. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The human's brow furrowed in thought. "We need to find another way out of the city," it said. "The Varkesh will be focused on the main roads and thoroughfares. If we can navigate the back alleys and side streets, we might be able to slip past them." Mara nodded, her determination overriding her fear. "Okay," she said, turning to the other children. "Everyone, stay close and be as quiet as possible. Follow the human's lead." The children nodded, their small faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and trust. They knew that their lives were in the human's hands, and they were determined to do whatever it took to survive. Carefully, the human led the group through the winding maze of rubble-strewn streets, pausing at every intersection to scan for any sign of the Varkesh. The children followed in silence, their footsteps muffled by the debris under footsteps muffled by the debris underfoot. As they navigated the perilous route, The children couldn't help but marvel at the human skill and determination. It moved with a practiced ease, avoiding detection and guiding them through the most treacherous sections of the city. The children were filled with a newfound respect and admiration for their unexpected protector. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the human paused and gestured towards a break in the buildings ahead. "There," it whispered, "I can see the outskirts of the city. If we can make it past those last few blocks, we might stand a chance of getting clear." Mara nodded, her eyes shining with hope. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steadier than it had been. The human led the way, the children trailing closely behind. As they approached the final stretch, the tension in the air was palpable. The children held their breath, their eyes darting from side to side, searching for any sign of the Varkesh. Suddenly, a distant shout pierced the silence, and the human immediately ushered the children into a nearby alleyway, shielding them with its own body. "Stay down," the human hissed, its voice laced with urgency. The children huddled together, their hearts racing as they heard the thunderous sound of Varkesh boots approaching. Mara clutched the hand of a younger child, her expression one of pure terror. The human peered cautiously around the corner, its eyes narrowed in concentration. Moments later, it withdrew, its face etched with grim determination. "They're coming this way," the human whispered, its voice barely audible. "We have to move, now." Without hesitation, the human gripped Mara's hand and began to lead the children deeper into the alleyway, their footsteps muffled by the debris underfoot. The children followed, their small bodies trembling with fear, but they trusted the human implicitly. As they navigated the winding maze of alleys, the sound of the Varkesh patrols grew closer and closer. The children could hear the harsh barking of orders, the clanking of armored boots, and their terror intensified with every passing moment. Finally, the human spotted a partially collapsed building, its structure still intact enough to offer a potential hiding place. Ushering the children inside, the human quickly set about barricading the entrance, using whatever debris and rubble they could find. "Everyone, stay quiet and out of sight," the human whispered, its expression stern. "I'll try to draw them away." Mara's eyes widened with alarm. "No, you can't," she hissed. "They'll kill you." The human placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I have to try," it said, its voice resolute. "I won't let them hurt you. Any of you. Just stay here and stay safe, no matter what happens." Before Mara could protest further, the human slipped out of the building, leaving the children huddled in the darkness, their hearts pounding with fear and uncertainty. The minutes that followed seemed to stretch on for an eternity. The children strained their ears, listening for any sign of the human or the approaching Varkesh. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the muffled sounds of distant conflict. Mara clutched the younger children, her trembling hands offering what little comfort she could. She knew that the human had sacrificed itself to save them, and the weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. Suddenly, a loud crash outside jolted the children, and they instinctively huddled closer together, their eyes wide with terror. Mara held her breath, her heart racing as the sound of Varkesh voices echoed through the alleyway. The children held perfectly still, their bodies rigid with fear. Mara could feel the pounding of her own heart, and she prayed that the Varkesh would not discover their hiding place. After what felt like an eternity, the voices and footsteps began to fade, and Mara dared to peek out from their makeshift shelter. To her astonishment, the alleyway was empty, save for a few scattered pieces of debris. Cautiously, Mara emerged from the building, the other children following close behind. They scanned the area, searching for any sign of the human, but there was no trace of their protector. Mara felt a lump in her throat, her eyes stinging with tears. "Where is the human?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The children exchanged worried glances, their expressions filled with the same anguish and uncertainty. Mara took a deep, shuddering breath, her resolve hardening. "We have to find it," she said, her voice growing stronger. "It sacrificed itself for us. We can't just leave it behind." The children nodded, their determination mirroring Mara's own. Together, they began to search the alleyway, their steps cautious and their eyes vigilant. As they combed through the debris, Mara's heart sank. There was no sign of the human, no indication of what had become of their protector. Just as she was about to give up hope, a small glint of metal caught her eye. Mara hurried over, her breath catching in her throat. There, half buried in the rubble, was a tattered piece of the human spacesuit, stained with what looked like blood. Mara's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the fabric, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Oh, human," she whispered, her voice thick with grief. The other children gathered around her, their own faces etched with sorrow and disbelief. They had lost so much, and now, it seemed, they had lost their savior as well. But even in the face of this devastating loss, Mara felt a spark of determination ignite within her. She knew that the human had sacrificed itself to give them a chance at survival, and she was determined not to let that sacrifice be in vain. Steeling her resolve, Mara turned to the other children, her eyes shining with a newfound purpose. "We can't stop now," she said, her voice firm. "The human gave its life to save us, and we owe it to them to keep going, to find a way off this planet and survive." The children nodded, their expressions mirroring Mara's determination. Together, they gathered the tattered remnants of the human spacesuit, a poignant reminder of the sacrifice that had been made on their behalf. With a heavy heart, but a resolute spirit, Mara led the children onwards, their steps strengthened by the memory of the human's unwavering courage and compassion. They knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, but they were determined to honor the human's legacy, to live on and rebuild, no matter the cost. As they pressed forward, the children couldn't help but wonder what lay in store for them. Would they find other Iklari survivors? Would they be able to forge a new life, a new home, in the wake of this devastating tragedy? And what of the human? Would its selfless act of heroism be remembered, its name etched into the annals of Iklari history? Only time would tell, but in that moment, the children were filled with a newfound sense of purpose, a determination to survive and to rebuild, in memory of the human who had given everything to ensure their future.